Among the club of weapons that people cared little for during the war but people nowadays overhype, the shotgun probably stands even taller than the MP18. It's a funny one because unlike SMGs, every country in the war had shotguns. They just mostly stayed on the civilian market. Shotguns were not a new invention, everyone knew about them. Part of the myth seems to come from Germany claiming the weapon was inhumane and threatening to execute American soldiers ever caught with one. A move so stupid no German official put his signature to it, and the threat was never carried out. It mainly is remembered because it was perfect fodder for jokes and American propaganda. But if Germans claiming a weapon breaks the laws of war when it clearly doesn't is enough for you to think it's OP, meet your new Wunderwaffe. This thing is also a shotgun, but converted to shoot flares and tear gas cartridges. It was used by the French early in the war, and despite the fact it uses chemicals that are not even banned for use on civilians, Germany claimed that it brought the Hague and made void any complaints about their use of poison gas. If it's not clear, maybe the German government isn't the most trustworthy source. Okay, let's get into the meat of it. America joining the war would not, in fact, have been the first time German soldiers would face troops with shotguns, and not even close. My title should be a little bit longer. I shortened it, of course, purely to fit within YouTube's limit and nothing else. Being pedantic, it should be WW1 shotguns sucked in most combat roles, or why no one made them standard issue outside of America. They were not officially adopted as being standard kit for anyone else, but if crossbows made their way to the front line, of course shotguns did too. Turns out a lot of people had the idea to use shotguns, so why isn't it talked about more? To put it simply, shotguns were not a good assault weapon, and no army considered them to be. Going into the war in 1914, British doctrine prescribed that attacking infantry may have to start opening fire on the enemy when it gets within 1400 yards of him. Italian doctrine said attackers need to reach 900 to 1000 meters from the enemy position before starting to shoot. French doctrine placed it at 1200 meters. Now, it will go down during the war, but you may already see the problem. By 1918, the French tried to avoid opening fire until they were within 500 meters of the enemy. They put a shotgun's effective range at 40. That's not gonna cut it. But yes, despite the fact they're not officially issued, they do still use shotguns, and are nice enough to list what roles they think the weapon fills. First are night patrols that defend against raids, and the raids themselves. I think it's self-explanatory. Night reduces how far you can see your enemy, and raids generally aim to get inside the enemy trenches as fast as possible without spending hours doing fire and maneuver. And in fact, part of the American response to Germany's threat was to highlight a case where after a German raid on their trenches, German-made shotgun shells were found on the site. Then we have the biggest role, trench mopping. To explain quickly, attacking infantry is generally split into two groups. You have assault infantry who pushes forward, and trench moppers who are tasked with focusing on making sure the enemy trench system is fully cleared. They follow behind an assault wave, and when it has pushed past an enemy trench, moppers push sideways to widen any breach. They take care of any strong point left behind, they make sure you don't get shot in the back, and they manage prisoners. Keep that one in the back of your mind. Moppers are regular infantry pit for the occasion. They still have the full arsenal of LMGs, rifle grenades, and anything you can think of. But they generally pack more close quarters weaponry in an ad hoc fashion, and that's where shotguns sometimes come in. Then there's two other roles to mention. First is pilots. Shotguns were sometimes borrowed to planes for personal defense early in the war prior to machine guns becoming ubiquitous. It sounds a little dumb, until you remember that the top strong ace of the allies of both world wars combined is a man who largely flew up to enemy planes and shot their pilots with a carbine. And finally, we get to the primary reason America brought them in. As per official government statement, American doctrine mostly adopted shotguns to be issued to soldiers who watch over prisoners. Did they get into the front line anyway? Yes. To a much smaller extent, they were considered for use by patrols. Did they see fighting and earn at least one man a Medal of Honor? Yes. But were they some sort of fantastic weapon that redefined infantry combat and terrified the Germans? Absolutely not. They were an extremely situational weapon unsuited to the vast majority of infantry fighting, and were not officially adopted by anyone else after the war.